Okay, now that we have a good blend and we've added a little EQ to sculpt each channel, and in some instances we sliced out some problem frequencies, then we can get to controlling dynamics. And just like EQ examples a moment ago, we can control dynamics for either creative purposes or for fixing problems. And the tools of the trades are these guys here: gates, compressors, and limiters. In this example here with this PreSonus board, we have a ton of them. In fact, we have a gate, compressor, and limiter on every single channel and every single subgroup. Back in the analog world, we'd probably need to use an outboard processor like this, like a compressor gate like this from DBX. You'd use an insert cable, like we said before, to insert that into a channel. And in the case of this is a stereo or two-channel one, you'd only be able to control the dynamics of just two channels here. So do you see how digital consoles end up being a great deal? If you added in the cost of a compressor like this for every single channel, buy all these hardware boxes, I'd spend an absolute fortune. So before we actually get to use these tools, let's have a quick look and see how they work. Okay, the three dynamic effects we'll look at are compressors, limiters, and gates. And the first one we'll look at is the compressors. Now, if you look at a signal like this, there's a lot of big peaks, but the average level of this signal is pretty low. Compressor's job is to compress down those peaks so we can have an overall hotter signal. Now, three main controls on a compressor are threshold, ratio, and gain. Now, a threshold's job is that when you bring that down, then it will compress everything above that threshold by a ratio or a factor which is determined by the ratio. In other words, if we were to do a 2-to-1 ratio, then everything above that threshold would get squashed by half. If we were to do a 4-to-1 ratio, then it would be squashed by a quarter. So now we have a more densely kind of populated signal, but it is lower in level, and that's what the makeup gain is all about. We then do the makeup gain, bring that up, and it's a much punchier signal. I mean, compare that signal to the original signal that we had when we started out. Okay, so here are the main controls on a compressor. The first one is the threshold. That is where the compressor kicks in. If your threshold is too high, then no compression happens. But then once you bring that threshold down, then the ratio is how much compression. Is it a 2-to-1 or a 4-to-1, etc.? Then the gain, sometimes called a makeup gain, is how amped up is that resulting signal after it's been compressed down. And then we have attack and release. The attack is how soon the compressor kicks in, and the release is how quickly does the compressor stop compressing. Now, if we were to look at limiters, basically a limiter is effectively an infinity-to-one compressor. It's almost like a brick wall that's been placed there so that just the signal cannot get any further after that. Now, in terms of noise gates are just a great way of just taking out low-level noise. So just like a compressor, they also do have a threshold, and the whole idea is you bring that down, and then whatever doesn't get above that threshold just effectively gets cut out. It's almost like an automated mute button. It's really great for things like noisy guitar amps. So do you see in the abstract what these tools do? Gates clean up a signal and drop out all the low-level stuff. Compressors narrow the dynamic range so that a signal can kind of pop its head out of a mix and also protect you against distortion from loud peaks. And limiters can just strictly limit the level of a signal so only a certain amount goes through. Now, I'm going to show you these tools on this PreSonus console, but you'll see very similar consoles on other digital boards and even standalone dynamic processors like that DBX one I just showed you a little while ago. So you ready to go? Let's get stuck into it.